Long before oil crises and financial fluctuations, and even before borders were drawn on maps, power followed a far more fundamental element: the flow of water. This is not a metaphor, but a literal reality. Those who controlled water determined who would produce, who would settle, who would be fed, and who would be forced to migrate, submit, or disappear. Today, discussions about water frame it as a future problem, linking it to climate change or population growth. However, this perspective overlooks a deeper truth. Water has always been political. It has constantly been allocated and fought over. The reason is not its scarcity, but its controllability. This is precisely what most people fail to recognize. Water does not generate power simply by existing. The real power emerges when water is organized, redirected, stored, and access to it is restricted. Once societies learned this, they also learned how to govern. Welcome to the intersection of money, power, and history. Because here nothing is as simple as it appears. Civilization did not begin with trade, but with irrigation. The first cities were not founded in the most fertile lands or the most favorable climates, but in places where water sources could be controlled: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Yellow River Basin. These were not mere geographical coincidences. They were early laboratories of control. Rivers flooded unpredictably, destroying crops and leaving behind salt. When uncontrolled, they were as destructive as they were life-giving. To survive, societies had to become organized. Canals had to be dug, levees maintained, floods anticipated. An authority was needed to decide when water would flow, where it would be directed, and who would have access to it. Over time, this structure became power itself. In early Mesopotamia, irrigation canals stretching for kilometers transformed arid lands into farmland. However, these systems did not operate on their own. They required labor, timing, and supervision. If an upstream settlement used too much water, downstream regions faced famine. If a canal collapsed during flood season, land would either turn into swamp or dry out completely. Water management was not an environmental issue. It was a political one. As city-states fought over canals, later empires would fight over ports. Disrupting an enemy's irrigation system could be more effective than destroying its walls. You did not need to capture a city. Drying it out was enough. This understanding was recognized early and codified. The Code of Hammurabi contained detailed rules regarding water use and canal maintenance. If a landowner neglected canal maintenance and caused flooding, they were held responsible for damages. If a neighbor's crops were damaged, compensation was mandatory. Mistakes in water management were not merely inefficiencies, they were crimes. This reveals a clear truth. Water is infrastructure, and infrastructure is power. Egypt took this system further. The regular flooding of the Nile made the process predictable, but not simple. Flood levels determined harvests, harvests determined taxes, and taxes determined state power. Pharaohs ruled not only through myths, but by controlling calendars, measurements, and storage. When the flood succeeded, power increased. When it failed, legitimacy weakened. This was not ideology, it was organization. In the East, China developed the model of the hydraulic state. Large-scale projects, dams, canals, and flood control systems required centralized administration and long-term planning. The bureaucracy that managed water became the backbone of the state. Officials were not merely administrators. They were actors controlling flow. Whoever controlled the river controlled society. Rome followed a different path but reached the same outcome. Aqueducts were not built for comfort, but for order. Cities dependent on this system became dependent on Rome itself. Maintenance required imperial support, and access was granted through political loyalty. As water flowed downward, power flowed back toward Rome. When water stopped, cities emptied. What most modern narratives miss is this: these societies did not fight water wars because of absolute scarcity. They fought because control creates power. Scarcity was often not absolute. The decisive factor was control. As irrigation expanded, populations grew. As populations grew, dependence deepened. More people meant more food. More food meant more coordination. Coordination created authority, and authority demanded obedience. This cycle brought stability for a time, but also introduced fragility. Because when a society is built on a centralized system, any disruption becomes catastrophic. If a canal is blocked, a dam collapses, or a political crisis interrupts maintenance, the entire structure begins to fail. At that point, water is no longer power. It becomes a source of collapse. In Mesopotamia, prolonged irrigation led to soil salinization and declining yields. Farmers adapted by switching from wheat to barley. But while the agricultural base weakened, bureaucratic demands remained unchanged. The system functioned until it no longer did. The Maya built complex water storage systems to resist drought. However, prolonged droughts and political rigidity led to collapse. Angkor survived for centuries with massive water systems, but over time, complexity turned into vulnerability. Climate shifts and political issues disrupted maintenance. The system clogged and the city was gradually abandoned. The fundamental pattern is clear. Water systems do not collapse suddenly. They deteriorate slowly and then fail all at once. Warning signs are often ignored. Budgets are reduced. Coordination weakens. Small problems grow. By the time the crisis is recognized, it is already too late. This is not just a story of the past. It is a template for the present. Today, water is managed through dams, international agreements, and modern infrastructure. Yet the logic remains unchanged. Whoever controls upstream controls downstream. That is why many modern conflicts are fundamentally rooted in water. The Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, the Indus, and the Mekong. These are not just rivers, they are economic arteries. A dam built upstream does not only generate energy, it reshapes power balances. Conflict arises not from scarcity, but from imbalance. The same logic applies to the financial world. Just as water flow was controlled, capital flow is controlled today. Modern systems are built on efficiency, but they produce fragility. When prices rise, access becomes unequal. When maintenance is delayed, systems collapse. And people experience this not as a technical failure, but as instability. The truth is this. Societies do not collapse because of lack of resources, but because they assume control is permanent. Flow is never stable. If systems cannot adapt to change, they break. Water makes this reality visible because nothing can replace it. When flow stops, reality asserts itself, and reality does not negotiate. The most unsettling lesson is this. The problem is not scarcity, but the fragility created by dependence. History does not reward perfectly functioning systems. It rewards systems that can survive collapse. That is why major crises rarely begin dramatically. They start with a budget discussion, a maintenance delay, or a small technical issue. Something seemingly insignificant, until it is no longer insignificant.